Hello and welcome. You're watching NDTV. I'm Rishika Barwa. India's cases are declining. Deaths are also declining, even though they still continue to be high. But as we plan to now gradually talking about unlocking different parts of the country, the big question is, are there enough vaccines available in the Indian market to protect us? Because the virus has not gone anywhere. And what can India do at this moment to vaccinate as many people as we can in a short span of time? Dr. Randeep Guleria, the head of the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, joins us. Thanks, Dr. Guleria, for sparing your time and being with us on NDTV. I want to begin by asking you about India's cases, which are thankfully declining. India's cases are at a 6-week low at the moment. Deaths also, while they continue to remain high, are seeing a declining trend. What explains this gap between cases peaking first and deaths peaking later?
So I think this is related to the fact that we had this huge peak and a large number of people or patients who are in critical care or in ICU or were very sick, and therefore they continue to be on supportive treatment in terms of ventilators and other things, and their mortality therefore is happening over a period of time. But I do agree with you that the deaths are much higher, and in my mind we should really look at them critically. I feel every hospital should do a death audit to see how they could must bring down their deaths for the future and what we could do in terms of preventing them. Was it related to treatment strategy? Was it related to late reporting, over dependence on home isolation and oxygen at home? These are factors which we need to look at. But luckily now we're seeing a downward trend both in the number of cases and the number of deaths. So we seem to be past our peak as far as the country is concerned, although there is a little bit of concern as far as the southern part of India and the northeast is still there.
Right. But even as we say that cases and deaths are declining, and, you know, as you say that the country as a whole perhaps has passed this peak of the second wave, now Delhi will start unlocking the city from Monday. Maharashtra says it's going to start easing curbs from June in a phased manner. Is unlocking the country a good idea at this time?
So I think here we have this issue of that we should not forget the lessons that we've learned from the past and the mistakes that we made between the first and the second wave, which led to this huge surge as far as the second wave is concerned. And I think we need to look at it very, very critically. The first important thing is that we really need to understand how important it is that we have COVID appropriate behavior. Like you said, the virus has not got anywhere. The virus is still there. And therefore, if our cases are down, we should not get overconfident and feel that now COVID has gone away and we don't need to wear a mask. We can have sort of functions, we can have events where there can be crowds, and we allow super spreading events to happen. So even if we unlock, we have to do it in a very graded manner. At the same time, it's very, very important that we continue to increase our testing, continue to have aggressive surveillance so that we're able to really pick up any area which becomes a hotspot where the cases suddenly start showing an upward trend, and we become very aggressive in having a lockdown in that area so that we don't allow it to spread to other areas as what happened during the early part of the second wave. And also, as you rightly said, work aggressively on trying to increase vaccination. So our strategy has to be multi-pronged. It has to be looking at very aggressive COVID appropriate behavior, making sure that we don't allow crowds to develop, don't allow super spreading events to happen, very aggressive surveillance with testing, treating, tracking being done, and at the same time trying to ramp up vaccination as much as we can.
You know, I'm very glad that you talk about vaccinations because I want to come to a whole host of questions on vaccines. There is a shortage of COVID-19 vaccines in the country, and that remains a huge cause of concern all over the country. The state-wise procurement policy is clearly not working. Dr. Guleria, many pharma companies have, categorically refused to deal with individual states, saying they'll only deal with the center. What's the solution?
So I think the solution is to look at it holistically, and we have to look at a supply and demand issue. Obviously, if you look at India as a whole, and especially if you're looking at people over the age of 18, and you want to vaccinate all of them, you're looking at almost 2 billion doses. It's not possible for us to have those doses available right now. So I would think that we need to really look at what are the current doses that we have, ramp up our production as much as possible, try and get as many vaccines as we can from outside, from abroad, and then have an equitable distribution to all areas depending on a strategy, and at the same time, do it in a graded manner so that we are able to meet the number of doses that we have to the number of people we can vaccinate, and keeping a priority in mind. Currently, I still feel we need to prioritize and work aggressively on the high risk groups. We must vaccinate people who have comorbidities, who are of the older age group, because even if you look at the data from the second wave, the highest mortality was in those who had comorbidities or who were in the older age group. Therefore, those are the ones that we need to vaccinate first if we have limited doses. Yes, if you have a large number of doses, everyone should be vaccinated because you need to break the chain of transmission. But till such time that we don't have that, we need to have a graded response.
I want to ask you a quick follow-up question. You're saying that we need to ramp up vaccine production, which the government says is happening. More doses will be made available in the next 2 months. As far as getting vaccines from abroad and distributing equally is concerned, do you think the centre needs to take the responsibility to do that? Because right now it's been fragmented and there are states and chief ministers coming out and saying that states are literally squabbling with each other and competing in the free market for vaccines.
So I think that is something that we need to look at. India is one country and therefore we need to develop a holistic solution. And it seems that the manufacturers also want to deal with one source rather than multiple sources. And therefore a strategy needs to be developed. It could be either looking at it from a center point of view or as a group, what can be done from different states. But I think there has to be some comprehensive strategy because vaccines are needed. We need to see how best we can get them and how best we can distribute them for the entire country, and how one can come out with a mechanism where it is distributed equitably.
But you do agree that the current strategy needs to be changed?
We need to look at a strategy which is workable and which can be done at a ground reality, where we can look at the ground reality.
Right. Dr. Gulleria, the other big question that a lot of our viewers have actually asked is why didn't India pre-order large number of doses of global vaccines at a time when a lot of other countries did?
So there are 2 or 3 things that we must understand. When we were looking at vaccines, whenever you look at a vaccine, let's look at any vaccine. There are 3 or 4 factors. One is, of course, the production capacity which any firm has. The second is the cost of the vaccine. Is it affordable for our country? And third is, what is the mechanism of distributing it in terms of the feasibility? And of course, then is the prioritization. So if we look at prioritization, we had a list for prioritization. If you look at feasibility, for us as a country and for most of the world, the feasibility would be a vaccine which can be part of an already ongoing immunization program. That is a vaccine which can be kept at 2 to 8 degrees centigrade. If we looked at the Pfizer vaccine and started ordering that in large amounts, we would have to have a whole cold chain of minus 70 degrees available from, and that would mean that possibly a lot of bigger cities would get the vaccine, but it would not be possible in rural India in terms of getting minus 70 degrees cold chain being maintained there. And like I said, production capacity. We are looking at a capacity which is more India specific. You see, India has the advantage that we are able to produce vaccines on our own. Imagine if we were not producing vaccines, then we would be going out and asking other countries to give us vaccines, and we would be dependent on what they could give it, because many countries have not allowed vaccines to go out from their own country and have said the first priority should be vaccinating their own citizens. And that has created a big issue. We could have pre-ordered them, but it would not have been practical. It would not have been cost effective. And I think it would not have been feasible even if we had these doses available.
But we are considering getting the Pfizer vaccine now. And Pfizer has actually now come out and said that their vaccine can be stored in 2 to 8 degrees for a period of a month. My question, therefore, is did we not apprehend this shortage?
So there was a chance that we would have a shortage, because let's accept the fact that our population is much bigger than that of any other country. If you look at the number of vaccine doses that we've done today, we vaccinated the number of people that we vaccinated today is equivalent to many countries in Europe. So we need a large number of doses. At that point in time, the Pfizer vaccine was available only, could be stored only at minus 70. The technology has now been changed so that it can be stored at a much temperature which is more practical.
Right.
But then also we need to look at the doses that are available. And the number of doses that we will be able to get, which would be practical in our own setup, is going to be possibly from Serum Institute and from Bharat Biotech, and now we will have Sputnik also. And we will have other vaccines which are being made in our own country from Cadila, and other manufacturers also coming on board. So in my mind, this shortage is transitory. It may be there for about 4 to 6 weeks. I'm very hopeful that in July, we will be able to ramp up production, and hopefully by the end of July, we may be even be able to do 1 crore vaccination a day.
So you're saying that by July, we should be able to vaccinate 1 crore people. That's what the plan is.
I'm hopeful that by, let's say, the second half of July, we should be able to achieve that target, because that will really make a big difference in terms of fighting and trying to get not having any other wave coming in our country.
All right, very important clarification there. Now, Dr. Guleria, I just want to shift our focus. The government has allowed vaccinating lactating mothers, breastfeeding mothers, but pregnant women have still not been included in the COVID-19 vaccination in India. When can one expect this to happen?
So that is something that the group of experts has to decide. I'm very hopeful that this will happen soon, because there is now a lot of data emerging that pregnant women need to be vaccinated, and they do form a little bit of a high risk group in terms of morbidity. It's very good that it's been now approved for lactating mothers, because it not only protects the mother but also gives antibodies to the baby who is being breastfed in terms of protection. But if you look at data which is emerging from vaccines abroad, it does suggest these vaccines are safe, and there is a large number of studies which have been done which show that these vaccines are safe, and therefore if they are safe, they should be safe across the board. And the vaccine that are being used in India are using a similar platform that was used in the past. And there is also some data which has come out which suggests that pregnant women do have a higher morbidity and mortality. Therefore, I think that we should actually move ahead and start vaccinating pregnant women also as a group.
The allied question, which vaccine is the safest for pregnant women? Because so far the studies that we've seen that have been conducted abroad only talk about the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, both of which are not available in India.
Yes, but if you look at, let's say, the Covaxin, which is again inactivated virus vaccine, this is the same platform which is used for the flu vaccine also. And the flu vaccine is something which we are already vaccinating and giving to pregnant women. So using a similar platform, I think we could say that it should be safe. Remember, in most studies which were done, even for the flu vaccine, when it was approved for pregnant women, it was looking at a risk-benefit analysis. You can't do a large number of studies and say that we will try all the vaccines in pregnant women and then say that they are safe. The current risk-benefit analysis does seem to suggest that the benefits far outweigh the risk, and therefore it's worthwhile to vaccinate pregnant women.
But if you were to compare Covaxin and Covishield, and as and when the government does allow pregnant women in the country to be vaccinated, do you anticipate that it is Covaxin that will be recommended for pregnant women?
I don't think so. I think we will have data for Covishield also coming up very shortly, and we would be able to get approval for both the vaccines being given for pregnant women.
I also want to ask you about children, because children above the age of 12 are now getting the Pfizer vaccine in the United States. When can India begin vaccinating children, whether it's with Pfizer or, with another vaccine? How soon can it happen?
So again, this is something that we need to do, because if we are looking at opening up schools and really breaking the chain of transmission, it's important to vaccinate children also. Pfizer has that data and it's got approval. Bharat Biotech has already started its trial in India for vaccinating children from the age of 2 years to the age of 18 years. That will take I think the data should be out in August and September.
Okay.
So my own feeling is that by that we should be able to start vaccinating children by August or September as more and more data accumulates. And that will be very important, because that will also help us both in opening schools and also breaking the chain of transmission.
Dr. Guleria, Covaxin has not been recognized by the World Health Organization yet. This has raised concern among people who have received the vaccine, questions over the efficacy of the vaccine. Why has WHO not recognized Covaxin?
As far as I know, and this is something that I can't say that I have definite knowledge of, WHO just wanted some more phase 3 data, and that is already there because that phase 3 trial is over. And once that data is looked at by their expert committee, I'm hopeful that that approval should happen. It's important because a large number of people have got Covaxin, and one would need that certificate if one is planning to travel abroad.
So you're saying sooner rather than later it will happen?
Yes, I'm quite hopeful.
Very quickly want to shift focus to black fungus. Cases in India higher than anywhere else in the world. You've issued a lot of clarifications on this, but my question is, do we need national guidelines on administration of steroids, since you've elaborated in the past that a lot of these cases could actually be because of the misuse or abuse of steroids in the treatment of COVID?
Yes, so I think we already have guidelines which have really said when steroids should be used, what should be done, how sugars should be monitored, and how we can really prevent misuse of drugs, which include steroids and various other drugs. The problem in our country is implementation. The issue here is that you can buy any drug in our country over the counter.
Right.
If someone told me take steroids, I could go to the chemist and buy steroids and take them even without having a prescription. So I think we need to look at it in a holistic manner. We need to look at it as a strategy of how do we really prevent misuse of drugs, which includes even antibiotics, in our country, because this is also driving what we call antimicrobial resistance.
Right. A quick fact versus myth check, Dr. Guleria. Could prolonged use of vitamin C, Zincovate, other such immunity boosters be linked to black fungus?
So there is not much data. There is some studies which have tried to link the use of zinc with the mucormycosis. But I think we need more data before we can say that this is a direct cause and effect relationship.
Okay, but I want to also ask you this question from the point of view, a lot of people have been taking these supplements since the beginning of the pandemic. They're believed to be immunity boosters, but now we're well over 1 year into the pandemic. For how long can you continue to take these medications?
So I don't think that there is much evidence that they really improve your immunity, but a lot of people do take them as, let's say, home remedies. You could take them for a long time, but I would really suggest that if you have taken it for a very long time, it's worthwhile to give it a break also.
Right. So you think that these should also be perhaps prescribed, or you should consult a doctor before just indiscriminately taking multivitamins or whatever it is?
Yeah, if your diet is good, you're taking a lot of fresh fruit, green leafy vegetables, you will get a lot of minerals and vitamins naturally rather than having to take supplements.
Well, that's a very important clarification. I'm going to play that out to a lot of my own family members. But what is the difference, Dr. Guleria, between black, white and yellow fungus? You've issued important clarifications on this. Which is more dangerous? Which is the one that we really need to be worried about?
So I think we should go by the name rather than the color. That's the first thing. As far as I can make out, even black fungus is not a correct term, because that is a different taxonomy as far as mycology is concerned. But what we call black fungus is basically a fungus which by the name of mucormycosis, which basically affects more of your nose and sinuses and can also go into the orbit and the brain, which is the current concern, and we're seeing a lot of such cases. It can also affect the lungs, which is the second most common area where it causes infection, and it can also infect the intestines and other organs. White fungus is what is known as Candida. It is another fungus which is usually seen in people whose immunity is low. It is usually white in color, and there can be white coating of the tongue. It can cause what we call oropharyngeal candidiasis. That is the mouth and the food pipe gets colonized with this fungal infection. It is easier to treat and not that serious unless it really spreads to multiple organs and causes multi-organ failure. So currently we're seeing much more of the mucormycosis, the so-called black fungus, than the white fungus. But I think it's better to give names rather than getting this confusion of the colors, because that can depend on what you're seeing in terms of a visual impression.
But black fungus is the most dangerous?
Black fungus is more difficult to treat because it needs drugs like amphotericin for a longer period of time. Along with that, you need to do surgery in terms of debridement. You need to take out the dead tissue and the fungus out. And that is why the treatment has to be a combination of surgery with antifungal drugs. For the Candida, you can give antifungal and you can become all right with that. You may not need surgery.
But with white fungus and yellow fungus, are they also related to COVID-19 and the use of steroids, indiscriminate use of steroids?
So Candida is also there occurring in people whose immunity is low. So it is also used to seen in people who are having steroids or who are having chemotherapy or post-transplant patients. And that's why a lot of times, even for that matter, in other immunosuppressive states, and one would at times even give drugs prophylactically to prevent against Candida. because that is seen more commonly. Mucormycosis is not that common, but because of COVID-19 is being seen much more.
All right. On that note, we're going to slip into a very short break. Coming up on the other side, we'll ask Dr. Guleria about long COVID. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Dr. Guleria continues to be live with us. Dr. Guleria, the other big question that's now emerging is long COVID. A lot of people have been infected and are recovering, but still continue to have symptoms for a prolonged period. Is this linked to low immunity?
So it's not linked that much to low immunity. We are seeing this more and more, and I think as our recovery rate improves and we have more and more people recovering, we will have to address managing long COVID or people who have post-COVID sequelae. But remember, what we really say is that if you have COVID, you have what we call an acute COVID, which can last up to 4 weeks. If you have symptoms between 4 to 12 weeks, it's an ongoing COVID symptomatic COVID. If it is more than 12 weeks, then it is something which we call long COVID or post-COVID sequelae. Many people who recover after COVID continue to have symptoms, which could be shortness of breath, cough, or headache, insomnia, or some of them have what we call chronic fatigue syndrome. They're not able to get up out of bed. They feel tired all the time. Their joint pains, body aches. And then, of course, you have this brain fog that you're not able to concentrate for quite some time. Some people continue to have a high pulse rate, tachycardia or palpitation continue for a long period of time. All of these tend to recover by 8 to 12 weeks. But there are some who have irreversible damage of certain organs, lung fibrosis, cardiac involvement, strokes, and even after 12 weeks, they continue to be symptomatic and they have what we call long COVID. And this is going to be a problem which requires a multidisciplinary approach because many of them even have stress and insomnia, mental health issues also need to be addressed.
But Dr. Guleria, when do you know that this is permanent damage and you need medical intervention? Are there any telltale signs about long COVID, something which is very typical that people need to be careful about and seek help?
So initially we used to think that all of these will be linked to severe COVID. Now we know that some of the symptoms can happen in mild people also who have not been even hospitalized. So even if you've recovered from COVID and some symptoms persist after 4 weeks, that is you continue to have fatigue, you're tired, joint pains, more often than not, you need symptomatic treatment and you need what we call rehabilitative care.
Right.
In some individuals who find that even after, let's say, 8 weeks, they continue to be symptomatic, out of breath when they come out from the toilet or when they're climbing a flight of stairs, they get short of breath, or they continue to have chest pain or other features, then it's important that you consult your doctor and you really get yourself evaluated for proper treatment.
All right. That's very important. Also, are those who are suffering from long COVID or are called the long haulers, are they more susceptible to reinfection?
So there's no data which suggests that if you have long COVID, your immunity is low, that you are that subgroup which needs to be vaccinated early or you can get infection repeatedly. They continue to be symptomatic, but their immune system is good enough. They do have antibodies which protect them for a long period of time.
All right. So even if you have those symptoms, you still have antibodies, so you're as susceptible. But it's important to understand at the moment that if these symptoms last beyond 12 weeks, that you should seek medical help, even if it's just shortness of breath, the inability to, say, perform your daily chores or exercise.
Correct, because then you will need some sort of rehabilitative care, maybe some medication, and that is something that needs to be addressed. And that is why we're all talking of having what we call post-COVID clinics, where you can really manage these patients in hospital, because they form a subset which is unique in a way that it's a syndromic approach which is required.
So are we looking to create more post-COVID clinics all over the country?
So this is a strategy which is being adopted by the government also. Most hospitals had started post-COVID clinic after the first wave. So probably they will restart it once unlocking happens. Right. But I think we need to even look at it at a district level also, because as COVID becomes more and more, we see more cases even in, let's say, tier 2, tier 3 cities. We need to have a strategy for managing post-COVID in that area also.
All right, very important clarification there on long COVID and the need for post-COVID care. Thank you so much, Dr. Gulere, for sparing your time and joining us on NDTV.
Thank you.